Okay, everyone, welcome to the webinar. So this is another NutriChem webinar. At any point, if you look on your right-hand side, there should be an area that says questions. So feel free to type in your questions as we go along, and I'm actually going to answer them only at the end though. But feel free, so you don't forget your questions, just type them in and we'll get to those at the end. There should also be a section called handouts. I did put the handout for the PowerPoint presentation. If you don't have the handout there, because you have a different version of the system, there's no problem at all. We're actually going to be emailing a recording of the webinar as well as emailing the slides too. Okay. All right. So let's get started here. I'm going to move this. There we go. So today's topic is winning the battle against ADHD. ADHD is something that we see a lot in our practice at NutriChem. A lot of people, want to try to avoid, if possible, some of the medications for ADHD. So today we're going to talk about what kind of testing you can do, what kind of nutritional support you can give to people with ADHD. So to start with, my name is Dr. Tanya Manikam. I'm a naturopathic doctor. Some of you might know me. I grew up in Ottawa. My undergraduate degree was in psychology. So I did this in Ottawa. I then went to University of Toronto in biology, and then I studied at the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine in 2009. People always ask me, what brought me into naturopathic medicine? Well, my family background is actually medical doctors. So I always thought I was going to go in regular medicine, but then my father got really ill with cancer, and something that really helped him was actually naturopathic medicine, which is what brought me to this field. I joined NutriChem in 2013, and I actually practice out of both locations. So there's the Richmond Road location, and we also have a Saint-Laurent location. My personal focus in my practice is mental health, but we treat everything from, menopause, women's health, men's health, digestive issues, anything you can think of, anything that you want to get to the bottom of. So for those of you who are not familiar with what a naturopathic doctor is, we are a licensed practitioner depending on the province. So Ontario, we are a licensed practitioner. We have a similar education as a family doctor, but we tend to use nutrition, supplements, herbs. Some naturopathic doctors will use manipulation and acupuncture as well to treat. The whole principle is that we want to find the root cause. We spend an hour usually with the patient the first time we see them, and we ask them a lot of questions. We do a lot of testing, blood work, urine work, to really find, okay, what's causing the issue? It is covered by most extended health benefits plan, and that includes the testing as well. So you can always check with your insurance company. And finally, we now have prescription rights in Ontario. So this passed on July 1st. Officially now, any naturopathic doctor who wants to prescribe certain things, such as, let's say, hormones, we're all going through testing. So we're all getting retested on our pharmacology. And then we will have prescription rights in Ontario. We don't have prescription rights for everything, so it's really stuff that works with our scope of practice. But it's a great thing. It's been going on in BC for a while, in the States as well, so it's great that Ontario now we've caught up. Okay, so today we're talking about ADHD. ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It's actually one of the most common childhood disorders and can continue through adolescence and adulthood. So it's not just for kids. I see often adults come in and they've just been diagnosed recently. So definitely something that adults can experience. It is, however, the most common childhood mental health disorder that's diagnosed in Canada. Symptoms can include difficulty staying focused and paying attention, difficulty controlling behavior, and then hyperactivity. We're going to go through all of that in more detail. I mentioned before, it's the most commonly diagnosed behavior disorder in childhood in Canada. It affects actually approximately 5% of school-age children. So usually in a classroom of 20 to 30 people, 20 to 30 kids, there'll be at least one child suffering with ADHD. So ADHD is attention issues and hyperactivity issues. Boys are more prone to have the hyperactive type disorder. We're going to go through the different disorders together. 50% of children who suffer from ADHD also display sleeping issues. So we're going to talk about what we can do about that as well. But that's a very prevalent issue for ADHD sufferers. So now something we always get asked is there a genetic link? 40% of children diagnosed with ADHD have a parent who also suffers from ADHD. I get often, parents come in with their kids, they've been recently diagnosed, and they're like, I see those symptoms, I had the same thing, I still have that issue. So it's definitely something that there is a genetic link. Twin studies. So for twin studies, in 75% of the cases, both siblings, both twins, will be diagnosed with ADHD. So that again supports the genetic link. They've looked at different types of genetic testing, different genes. There's not one single gene that causes ADHD, but we know that there's contributing genes. So now, something that's getting very popular is genetic testing. Some people are very familiar with 23andMe, right? It's very easy to get a hold of online. Unique genomics as well. That's another testing. So there's a lot of genetic testing. And when you test for genes, there's a bunch of different genes. And to be honest, it's not just because you're positive for one gene that means you're going to have one disorder. Sometimes it's a combination of different genes. So if you have done those tests before, the genes that are known to be linked to ADHD are DRD4, MTHFR. We're going to talk more about MTHFR in a bit, and COMT. So, and something too is that ADHD has no impact on intelligence, and that's something to remember. It has nothing to do about how smart a person is. And the truth is that it might affect the learning process though, and it can do that not just because of having a hard time, paying attention, but sometimes especially in the school environment, in the classroom, it can really cause, a disconnect between the teacher and the student, and that can really affect the learning process as well. So just something to keep in mind, that it has nothing to do with intelligence, and it's something to remind, especially the children that do have ADHD, because most of them do know that there's something going on, just to remind them, okay, listen, you're just as smart as the other kids. We just got to do things a bit differently. So how do we assess ADHD, right? So the first thing you want to make sure is that does your child or does your teenager or do you yourself actually have ADHD? There's a bunch of questionnaires out there. It usually should be done by a mental health practitioner, okay? Usually it's a set of questions. So for children, you'll actually have a questionnaire for the teacher, a questionnaire for the parents, and then a questionnaire for the child itself to ask the questions. And that's the best way of doing it as well, because if a child displays, like hyperactivity or attention issues at home, but she's completely fine at school or at daycare, well, then that's not true ADHD, right? Because ADHD is kind of something that a child or a person will suffer with continuously, not just, in one scenario. There's different subtypes of ADHD, so different types. Now, some people will predominantly be hyperactive. So they might have zero problem with attention. They might still have a bit of attention, but most of their symptoms have to do with being impulsive and being hyperactive. These people usually are bouncing off the walls, literally. Symptoms of hyperactive impulsive type. So they'll fidget, they'll squirm in their seats, they'll have a hard time sitting still. They'll talk a lot, so very loquacious. And they might dash around, they always have to touch everything, playing with anything in sight. They usually need to be constantly in motion, so constantly moving, have difficulty doing quiet tasks or activities, can be very impatient and act out without regard for consequences. They might have a hard time waiting for things they want or waiting their turns in games, so being very impatient in that sense as well. And they might often interrupt conversation or other people's activities because they have something to say and they need to say it right away, and they're not really aware. They can't help themselves but to interrupt other people. Another subtype of ADHD is predominantly inattentive. So for these people, they don't necessarily have the hyperactivity, or they might have a few symptoms, but really it's the attention that's the issue for these people. Their symptoms is they get easily distracted. They might have a hard time focusing on one thing, being very forgetful. They might become bored with a task after only a few minutes. These people tend to start a task and never finish it. So they start one, then they start another, then they start another. They often lose things. They seem not to listen when spoken to. So you're talking to them and they just don't seem like they're listening. Sometimes it seems like they're daydreaming, or they can move a bit slower. They have a difficulty processing information as quickly and accurately as others. So sometimes, they need excessive details, and they struggle to follow instructions. Now, of course, so we saw different subtypes, but the combined hyperactive impulsive type is definitely there. And actually, the majority of people do fall in both categories. So they have a hard time with hyperactivity as well as inattention. So what does our regular medical world usually do? So usually we'll put them on medication. The medications, usually the classification is the stimulants. So most people know Ritalin, there's also Concerta. Some people might get put on antidepressants or mood stabilizers. And it's important to remember that people with ADHD, especially when they get older, in the teen, 20s, and as adults, they might also have depression, anxiety. The side effects of the medication is decreased appetite. That's actually one of the most common side effects or complaint that I hear from parents, as well as having their kid have just a flat mood. It affects sleep, and we already mentioned, that 50% of kids with ADHD have a sleep issue already. So when you're affecting their sleep even more, it's not that fantastic, and it might actually cause tics in certain kids. Another thing that our regular medical world is aware of is behavioral intervention. So there's parent management training. So this is basically when you coach the parents how to deal with stuff for kids. So how to basically keep them on a schedule, get them organized. They'll do psychotherapy for kids, especially if there's an anxiety component in there as well. And even just to deal with the fact that, the kids know they're different, right? They know, okay, I'm not like the other kids. The other kids seem to be able to pay attention and I can't. And then there's some people that specialize in coming up with learning plans. So plans on how to improve their learning process for somebody who has especially the inattention form of ADHD. So before we start getting into the nutrition, nutraceuticals, the National Mental Health Institute came up with this little thing. This is mainly for parents. It's just how to keep your kids organized, especially kids with ADHD. One thing that is said over and over again is that if you have a schedule for these kids, they actually do thrive a lot better. So keep the same routine every day. Include time for homework, for play, for indoor and outdoor activities. And keep the schedule visible. Put it somewhere where they see it, and make it colorful so they understand and they can read it easily. And if there are going to be any changes in the schedule, make sure they know in advance. Write them down in advance and make it very aware. You want to be able to organize everyday items for them. So have a place for everything. Keep everything in its place all the time. Clothing, backpacks, toys, because again, that kind of comes up with a routine. Use homework, notebook organizers. So one thing for any kid with ADHD is you want their schoolwork or any task, or if it's their regular work, their careers, to be organized. They do a lot better when everything is organized. Make sure you be clear and consistent. So children and adults with ADHD need rules, but they also need to have details. So be clear, be consistent when you're talking to them. Don't let them try to guess, because then that just gets their attention completely off. And one thing, especially kids with the hyperactivity, they often receive criticism. They're often being told, be quiet, be still, but they don't really get a lot of rewards and praise. So definitely something to remember. And children with ADHD, you want to praise them when they do have, a good behavior, or if they are, succeeding. Coexisting conditions, so something to think about is that kids with ADHD might have learning disabilities, might have oppositional defiant disorder or conduct disorder, so often they might have an issue with authority. Anxiety, depression, this is becoming so prevalent in kids, and it's extremely sad, but we see it over and over again in our practice. OCD, Tourette syndrome, and bipolar disorder. So bipolar disorder is when, you go from a manic state to a depressed state, or it can be just going from a depressed state to a non-depressed state. So what we're going to talk about today is basically finding the root cause of ADHD. Is it because of a nutrient deficiency? Is it because of hormone issues? Is it because of a genetic issue? So we're going to go through all of this together one by one. And again, if you have questions, just type them up and then I'll answer them all at the end. We're going to start with nutrition and ADHD. Oops. So there's a lot of controversy even over nutrition for ADHD. I hear my patients come in and tell me, oh, well, my psychiatrist said that, I can give whatever I want to the kid to, eat and it won't affect their health. Well, the Center for Disease Control do say that when compared with children who have excellent or very good health, children who have fair or poor health status are more than twice as likely to have ADHD. As well as the Journal of Applied Psychophysiology, they say that diet modification plays a significant role in the management of ADHD and should be considered part of the treatment protocol. So there is evidence supporting this. The most common diet for ADHD is the Feingold diet. So I put the website right there just because it's very, very common. This was developed by Dr. Feingold. It's based on research done in the 1970s. So it's been a while. The first step to this diet is you avoid anything artificial, basically. Artificial colors, artificial flavors, artificial sweeteners, anything with preservatives, especially BHD, BHA, and TBHQ. You do this first and then see how it goes. So you do this for about 3 to 4 weeks and see if there's an improvement in hyperactivity and attention. If there isn't, you actually go to step number 2. Step number 2 is avoid foods containing salicylates. Salicylates is basically a compound. It's made from a lot of plants. It's basically it's in the same family as aspirin. Okay, it's thought that the plants produce this kind of to make sure that bugs don't come and eat them. So a lot of foods actually are high in salicylates, and if you have an intolerance to salicylates, you can have a lot of symptoms, and one of them can be attention issues and focus and concentration issues. So it's easy to find, you can find it online, a list of all the salicylate food, but, tea's on there, coffee's on there, dried herbs, spices, even strawberries is on there. So there's a lot of them there. If you look at the Feingold diet, so there's been a lot of research, and to be honest, some of the research shows that it has a really good effect, some research shows that it doesn't have a good effect. So here you have it study by year, and this is taking off their website specifically. So from 1978 to 2002, they mentioned a couple of studies there. As you can tell, it varies on what works or not. But so in 1989, one of the studies actually showed it was less than 50% effective, but all the other studies show that it was actually effective. So just something to keep in mind, something to give it a shot. Artificial colors, artificial flavors, there's a lot of downfalls to health anyways. So it's not something that we should be giving our kids anyways, so it should be easy to do. Now, the second thing you can do is avoid food intolerances. This includes gluten, dairy, soy, corn, eggs. These are the most common food intolerances. 40% of people with a dairy sensitivity also has a sensitivity to soy, and that's something to keep in mind. Now, I always ask my patients, okay, when you were growing up as a kid, did you have ear infections, throat infections? And if so, for me, that's always a red flag that it's a sign of a dairy intolerance. And if they have a dairy intolerance, then I tell them, okay, avoid the soy as well, just in case. When we have food intolerances, it increases inflammation in the body, right? So it's going to make any ailment actually worse. So how do you find out if you have a food intolerance? The best way is actually get tested, So there's different ways of testing for food intolerance. Let's start with IgG. So IgG test, this is done in the blood. So you do a blood draw, or some people will actually do a finger prick blood test as well. The one we use tests for 220 foods, and it'll list the ones that a person reacts to. IgA testing, that's actually better done in stool. So that's a possibility as well. Most people will start with IgG and then go to IgA. IgA tests for less foods. ALCAT is something that's become extremely popular. It's pretty popular in Europe. So what they look at is your white blood cells, if they're growing. If they're growing, it means that they're reacting to certain foods when they're exposed to food. If you have food intolerances, or if you suspect having food intolerance, using digestive enzymes is always a good idea. This breaks down the foods a lot better so that the immune system won't react to it completely. Here they took a look at a study. They studied people with celiac disease. So they had 132 participants from various ages. So some were kids, some were adults. And basically, they gave them a questionnaire for ADHD before and after starting a gluten-free diet. Now, these people were all assessed for celiac disease, so an allergy to gluten, and they all came back positive. And the results were that the overall score improved significantly. Um, and most of the ADHD-like symptomology kind of went away when the people started the gluten-free diet. So definitely something to keep in mind that, and it's not hard to avoid gluten anymore. There's so many alternatives. It's so easy, just avoid grains. And it's not harmful at all for the child to avoid gluten for a while. You probably would see a difference in the child within 4 weeks. So it's not like you'd have to do it for everything. Wait 4 weeks, do it, see how it goes. If you see a big change, well, then it might be worth it for the child to stay gluten-free. Option 3, so another diet, which is my favorite diet, is the elimination diet. This one, you avoid all foods known to cause inflammation in the body. So the Fango diet that had the artificial colors, preserves, and stuff, this is included in the elimination diet as well. So you avoid anything artificial. You also avoid sugar, which is fantastic, and sugar has been shown to make especially hyperactivores. You also avoid stuff like gluten, dairy, corn, eggs, soy, strawberries on the list, bananas, oranges, grapefruit, beef. So there's a lot of things on this diet. So usually when patients come and see me, I'll walk them through the diet. I'll also give them a sample menu so that they don't run out of ideas and run out of food to eat. You must do this diet for a minimum of 3 weeks to start seeing the benefits. So after 3 weeks, you do this 3 to 4 weeks, then you start introducing foods one at a time to see how they affect the body. For instance, this diet, I do it on a yearly basis just because you feel so fantastic for it. So you don't need to do it just for ADHD. You can do it for anybody can do it just to get rid of inflammation in the body. But the first time I did it, when I introduced the foods one by one, I used to teach nutrition and I used to be really sharp. People asked me questions and I would know the answer. But I was reintroducing soy, and for some reason I had to think about the questions and think about the answers before answering. But I was like, no, there's no way this can be because of soy. So I cut it back out and then I reintroduced it later, and the same thing happened. So for myself, eating soy actually affects my concentration and my focus. So this can be, and it could be any food. It can be tomatoes. I've had people that beef caused them headaches and migraines. So definitely it's my favorite diet to do. And I find it actually fun and you feel amazing on it. It's definitely safe to do with kids as well. We do it with kids all the time. The Lancet actually supported the elimination diet. So their elimination diet was a little less strict than what I usually give my patients. For them was no wheat, dairy, eggs, soy, or peanuts. But they did see a very good outcome for ADHD patients. So definitely, again, something that's supported by research. And the reason I'm putting all these research in is because a comment we'll often get, especially from other practitioners, is that, oh, there's no research supporting it. So now, if you are going to go see a different practitioner, you have these studies, you have the tools to say, well, you know what, I do have a couple of studies, so let's give it a try. So we talked about diet, and now we're going to talk about hormones. Hormones play a big role our entire life, right? And hormones can contribute to a lot of symptoms and a lot of disorders. The first one we're going to talk about is the thyroid hormone. So the thyroid hormone, it's released by the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland, this is situated in the middle of our neck, right there. It's responsible for body temperature regulation, for metabolism, communication with other hormones. So it talks to all the hormones in our body. When the thyroid isn't functioning properly, it's called hypothyroidism. If the thyroid is functioning too much, it's called hyperthyroidism. Hypothyroidism, so when the thyroid is not working well enough, symptoms can be weight gain or having a hard time losing weight. It can be thinning of hair, dry skin, low energy, cracked heels. Here's the depression, so it can really affect the mood, and a lack of concentration. For kids that the thyroid doesn't work properly, it can also have other symptoms, and one of them is failure to thrive. So they tend to not grow as fast. They might be smaller than the other kids in their class or in their age group. And anxiety. We see a lot of anxiety with kids with hypothyroidism. Hyperthyroidism, so that's when the thyroid is working too much. Symptoms of that can be restless leg syndrome, so the person's constantly have to move their leg. Hyperactivity, there's a hyperactivity. Insomnia, having a hard time, sleep. Can be hair loss as well, can be weight loss as well. Nervousness, irritability. These people often will complain of heat. They don't like being hot all the time, and they might have increased sweating. And some people with a hyperthyroid might actually have tremors as well. How do we measure the thyroid? Measured through the blood. It's extremely easy. You can get this done with your family doctor, no problem. And most family doctors will test the thyroid. TSH is called thyroid stimulating hormone. This is a hormone your brain sends your thyroid to work. The more it sends of this, the less your thyroid actually works. So it's your brain saying, come on, I want you to work, I want you to work. So the higher the number for TSH, the less your thyroid actually works. So in adults, TSH, this is tricky because, to be honest, what's considered normal values actually varies from country to country. And even province to province. So in Ontario, for adults, consider normal 0.35 to 5. But ideally, you'd want this TSH to be below 3. Okay, which is actually the standard now in BC and in the States as well. Ontario, we're just a little behind. I just want to stress, if you do get blood work with any type of practitioner, always ask for a copy. So you're right in Ontario to get a copy of your blood work. So always ask for a copy because you don't want just your levels to be normal. You want them to be optimal. And TSH is one of those. More hormones you can test with your thyroid. One of them is free T3 and T4. So those are the actual hormones coming out of the thyroid. Done through the blood. This usually you have to ask for. So usually doctors will not test this unless you personally ask for it or if your TSH is off. Okay, but it's possible for your TSH to be normal and then your free 3 and free T4 are not normal. So T4, our body turns it into T3, which is the active form of the hormone. Okay, so some people that have a really hard time turning T4 into T3 in the active form. And for that, there's lots we can do actually. But first you have to figure out if that's a problem. And finally, thyroid antibodies. So this as well, done in the blood, very easy. This one is checking to see if the thyroid issue is an autoimmune issue. Okay, is your immune system attacking your thyroid? The reason it's good to test this is because sometimes this will be positive. So your immune system will be attacking your thyroid. However, it just hasn't showed up in the blood yet. So it hasn't showed up as in your TSH, your free T3, and your T4. So this is something that any doctor can do. You just have to ask for it again. Okay. Most doctor would gladly do it, especially if you have any reason to do it, whether it's, attention focus issues, depression, anxiety, or weight issues, or anything like that, or if it runs in your family as well. So how do we promote thyroid function? So some people will take thyroid hormone. These people need thyroid hormone. They'll take either T3, they'll take T4, or they'll take desiccated thyroid, which is actual thyroid tissue. Selenium supplements. There's so much research with selenium supplements. Usually most of the research is between 100 and 200 micrograms. Selenium supplements are really high in something called Brazil nuts. So if you've ever had Brazil nuts before, fantastic. The saying is 3 Brazil nuts a day is similar to taking a supplement of selenium. Eating seaweed is good because it's high in iodine, and iodine will help you make your thyroid hormones more active. Exercise is great. This brings a lot of blood flow to the thyroid. Make sure you're not deficient in vitamins and minerals such as iron and B vitamins. And this is kind of a little thing. So if you have a thyroid issue, a lot of people with thyroid issue actually have low stomach acid. And then when they have low stomach acid, they don't absorb their iron and the B vitamins very well. But if their iron and B vitamins aren't good or to appropriate levels, then it affects the thyroid. So you're stuck in this cycle. So make sure you get your iron tested and some of the B vitamins like B12 tested as well. So I've been talking a lot. Let's take a 2-second break. I'm going to ask you guys a question. So I want you to tell me, What foods should somebody with hypothyroidism avoid? So somebody with underactive thyroid avoid. So let's see if I can launch this poll and let me know what you guys think. All right, so the answer is actually raw cauliflower. So the reason this is because people should avoid actually the raw cruciferous vegetables. Let me see if I can get back to get this poll out of the way here. Close poll. There we go. So cruciferous vegetables, this has been shown in studies, in animal studies, okay? It hasn't been proven in human studies, but it has been shown in animal studies. So there's nothing wrong, just give it a try and, see if that might work for you. I know I've had patients with hyperthyroidism that they just decide, instead of taking medication, they decide to just sit at home with, a couple bowls of raw broccoli, raw cauliflower at night and just munch on that. Okay, let's go to the next. Now we're going to talk about the adrenal glands. So the adrenal glands are two glands. They sit on top of our kidneys in our back right there. They secrete something called cortisol, and cortisols are stress hormones. So cortisol is released by the adrenal glands. It helps us deal with stress. It's basically our fight or flight response. It can be tested through the blood or the saliva. All right. If you go to a medical practitioner, they'll probably do blood because that's just how it's done. But the problem with blood is their cortisol levels, it changes throughout the day. So it's supposed to be high in the morning, then it goes down, and then you get a second high in the afternoon, and it goes down for the night. With saliva, you're able to test that because we send you home with a kit, and then you take saliva samples throughout the day. If cortisol is high, so all the time, this can lead to anxiety and hyperactivity. And if the cortisol gets too low, that's when you have a lack of energy, a lack of concentration, and depression. Now, it's true that there are some disorders that get, confused, that people think, oh, it's ADHD, but it's a misdiagnosis. And one of them is actually Addison's disease. Addison's disease is when the adrenal glands actually don't produce cortisol. Okay, they just can't do it. And this actually, you'll have very similar symptoms as ADHD. So that's something to test. It's happened to me once in my career where we tested, this person was coming in for ADHD and then tested their adrenal function, because we tested with everyone and they weren't producing cortisol. And then I was like, oh, is it a lab mistake? So we tested again and it was again, they weren't producing it. So we ended up sending them to a specialist for that reason. Okay. If you would do a salivary cortisol test, this is what the results would look like. So in the green area, this is where you're actually supposed to be. So this person had very low cortisol levels. So by boosting their adrenal glands, this would actually probably help a lot with their attention issues. So how can we control cortisol? Magnesium glycinate. So anybody who's been to NutriChem, they know we're a big fan of magnesium. Magnesium actually helps lower cortisol. So if somebody's cortisol is very high, it will really help lower it. So would GABA and phosphatidylserine. Those amino acids, and they work fantastic at lowering cortisol. B vitamins are important for the overall health of the adrenal glands. We can assess B vitamins just to see make sure you need it. Taking a good B complex if you have adrenal issues is very much recommended. Proper sleep. Now I know this can be an issue because sometimes a lot of kids with ADHD have a hard time with sleep. So if we can help them with their sleep, we'll actually be helping them with the cortisol. If cortisol is high, you can do meditation, you can do yoga, you can do Reiki. Reiki is basically something done with a practitioner, so a Reiki practitioner. It's a form of meditation and energy medicine. Proper diet low in sugar and caffeine. So sugar and caffeine boost the adrenal glands, all right? So if cortisol is too high, this will definitely put somebody in a hyperactive state. So definitely get rid of the sugar and get rid of some of the caffeine. And exercise is always great for the adrenal glands. And herbs. Now, which herbs to take really depends on a person, okay? So I don't recommend taking herbs unless you've asked somebody who knows about herbs or you've seen a clinician, because especially with kids, there's certain herbs we don't want to give them. So, and their herbs can interact with certain medications as well. So just keep that in mind, but there are herbs out there that can help. The third hormone we're going to talk about is insulin. So insulin is secreted by the pancreas. It helps take sugar from the blood and puts it in our cells, so our cells can make energy out of it. When insulin is absent, or if insulin isn't functioning properly, the blood sugar levels will become very unstable, and then that can lead to mood disturbances. If blood sugar gets too low, a person can have a really hard time with focus and concentration. They feel very tired. And then if blood sugar gets too high, they can be very hyper, but it can also lead to a lot of issues because the sugar can actually deposit itself in different organs. And this actually is high sugar levels is what leads to diabetes. So there we go. High blood sugar, hyperactivity can actually lead to confusion as well, and definitely increases your risk of heart disease as well as Alzheimer's. So I'm not sure if people here have heard, but there is such a thing now. They call it diabetes type 3. And that's basically Alzheimer's disease, or when the blood sugar affects your memory. Low blood sugar will lead to fatigue, lack of concentration, focus, and poor memory as well. How do we control insulin? Protein in the morning is the first thing to do. A lot of research shows, I think it was the University of Guelph, they mentioned that, just increasing your protein in the morning, like having a protein smoothie for breakfast, helps you regulate your blood sugar throughout the day. So, and do this with kids too. People ask me, oh, is it safe to give a protein smoothie to my child? It's a fantastic breakfast idea, so no problems at all. You want to avoid high glycemic foods. So those are foods that basically spike our blood sugar fast, okay? And people don't realize that even foods that are known to be healthy can actually cause our blood sugar to go very high. So one of those is watermelon. So of course the bread, the pasta, cookies, all that kind of stuff. And you want to focus on low glycemic foods. All vegetables are low glycemic and all proteins are low glycemic. A little trick though, if you combine a carbohydrate with a protein, this will prevent your blood sugar from spiking. So let's say you want something sweet. If you want a date, basically, if you mix that with almonds, well then your blood sugar won't spike. And then supplements we can give. There's chromium and cinnamon. Chromium, again, you want to make sure that, you've tested your blood sugar levels and stuff like that to make sure that you actually do need to work on them. And if so, chromium is a fantastic supplement. It's very inexpensive. And cinnamon. So just adding a teaspoon of cinnamon, to your breakfast or to your protein smoothie can really help you control your insulin levels. As far as blood sugar goes, for testing, you can test fasting blood sugar, all right? So that's the blood sugar in the moment. There's also hemoglobin A1C. So that gives us a picture of the blood sugar over the course of 90 days. That's usually done more in adults, not necessarily in kids, unless they suspect that something is off. If you suspect your child might have hypoglycemia, so when the blood sugar gets too low, something that they often do now is glucose tolerance testing. So you make the child fasting, you make them drink something glucose, so something sugary, something sweet. And then they measure basically the blood sugar levels after 2 hours, and just to see, and they can measure insulin as well to make sure the child's blood sugar doesn't get too low. But it's definitely something to consider and examine, or investigate, I should say. So we talked about hormones, we talked about the thyroid, the adrenal glands, insulin. Now we're going to talk about vitamins and minerals. Ferritin. So ferritin is the way we store iron in the body. It's measured through blood. If low, a person will feel fatigue. They'll have low energy and lack of concentration. So this is more for the inattention type. You actually want levels to be over 50. So everybody, you're always going to ask for copies of your blood work or your child's blood work. What's considered normal is actually over 80. Usually people will have the symptoms of fatigue, low energy, lack of concentration when the number is below 30. However, for some people, it's anything below 50. So I always want to aim to at least make sure that the ferritin levels are 50 or above. Here's a little study because, we want to make sure that we're supporting what we're saying. 53 children with ADHD, aged 4 to 14 years, were compared to a control group, which means people that did not have ADHD. They measured the ferritin in the blood, so the iron stores in the blood, and it was actually found abnormal in 84% of the children that had ADHD, as opposed to only 18% of the control group had low iron levels. So definitely something to investigate. And I actually see low iron often in my kids with ADHD, and it's so easy to correct. B12 and folic acid. So B12 and folic acid is very important for energy, very important for the nervous system, for focus, for memory, and for mood. So this would actually be for both hyperactive and attention subtypes. You test this through the blood. Okay, so for B12, sufficient is over 220, but optimal is over 500. So get a copy of your blood work again and make sure you're over that optimal. This will only tell you if you have enough B12. It doesn't tell you actually if you can utilize it. Some people have something called a methylation issue, okay? So this is when people can't actually utilize a lot of their B vitamins, specifically B12 and folic acid. This can be figured out if you're doing genetic testing. This is what is called the MTHFR gene mutation. Okay, so people that don't have this issue, we get B vitamins from food, from anywhere, and our body can actually, I like to call it, activate it. It adds something called a methyl group to the B12 so that we can utilize it. But some people with this genetic issue, they can't activate their B12 for them to use it, and they can't activate their folic acid for them to use it. These people are more at risk of having depression, anxiety, ADHD, any type of mental health disorder. So these people, if we find this out through genetic testing, or you can do something called organic acid testing, where they test for something called methylmalonate in the urine. And if this is high, then it usually can indicate a methylation issue. Or some people will choose to test another thing. It's called homocysteine. And that, if it's high in the blood, often means that, they can't utilize their B12, so they might have a methylation issue. So what is a good vegetarian source of B12? So let's see if we can get this poll working again. There we go. So what is a good vegetarian source of B12? Cauliflower, nutritional yeast, broccoli, and Brazil nuts. Because most of the people who are vegetarians are actually, they do lack B12, often just because they don't know what foods to eat that have B12 in it. So the answer is nutritional yeast. Okay, so actually nutritional yeast is the only vegetarian source, a good vegetarian source of B12 that we know of, really. So if you are a vegetarian and you don't eat meat, because meat is actually the best source of B12, right? So if you don't eat meat or you don't eat fish or eggs as well, then make sure that you have nutritional yeast. You can put nutritional yeast on salads. People find it tastes like Parmesan cheese, actually. So anything you'd put Parmesan cheese on, you can actually put nutritional yeast. Okay, so we got methylation issues down. Here's a little study. Again, we want to prove everything we're saying with studies, right? So basically, they just evaluated. They basically checked for genetic mutations with kids with ADHD. So they looked for this MTHFR mutation. They assessed 40 patients and they compared it to the control group. And there was a significant difference found where the kids with ADHD, a lot of them had this gene issue. It's genetic testing. It's extremely easy to do. Like I said, you can order 23andMe online. So many people are doing that right now. And then you get all this information. The problem with the genetic testing is that often they don't have the interpretation, so it's hard to know what everything means. But there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of programs that will interpret the test results you have, or you can always see a clinician that has a little background in genetics. Let's talk about vitamin D. So we have iron now, we know we got to check. We have our B12, we know we got to check. We got to check to see if there's a methylation issues, if we can utilize B12, and now we're going to test for vitamin D. Many people are low and they just don't know it. The best source of vitamin D is the sun, right? So if you have somebody that's indoors a lot, it might not be, they might actually be deficient in vitamin D. Vitamin D affects mood, affects energy, affects memory, affects focus. So for both for hyperactive and for the attention part of ADHD, it's definitely important to test. You test this through the blood. In Ontario, it's not covered by OHIP anymore, so you do have to pay for it, whether you're seeing your family doctor or you're seeing a naturopath. It's not expensive. It's about, I know, $25, $35. It's very, very cheap. Sufficient is over 75, but optimal is 120. Okay. Often I'll see kids with ADHD, their levels will be in the 40s, and that's very, very low. So get it tested, do it once a year as well, because we never know, right? Things change. You should be taking more or should be taking less. And as far as what foods are high in vitamin D, like I said, vitamin D usually comes from the sun, but seafood is actually pretty okay for vitamin D as well. So I know like shrimps is, or any fish, the clean fishes, they are higher in vitamin D as well. So that's the way of getting it through the diet. Magnesium. So a large percentage of the population is to be low in magnesium. Blood levels are not a great indicator, though, of your magnesium store. In fact, if your magnesium is low in your blood, for me, that's a big red flag, because magnesium is actually supposed to be in your tissue. It's supposed to be in your muscles and your bones, right? So that's not easy to test for. When it's low in the blood, it's most likely low in your tissue, so something to correct right away. Magnesium glycinate is the most absorbable form of magnesium. So if you are going to take magnesium, this is the type you want, because this is the one that's going to get in your tissue properly. Now, there's different types of magnesium out there. There's oxide, citrate, there's so many. Magnesium oxide is when we don't absorb well, so we tend to give it to people with constipation. Same with citrate, although we do absorb citrate a little bit better, but magnesium glycinate compared to the other two, we absorb a lot better. Magnesium deficiency symptoms, anxiety, depression, so anything related to mood, lack of focus, concentration, unable to relax, so that's the hyperactivity. Can do muscle aches as well, constipation. Here's a little study. So here they examined basically magnesium levels in kids with ADHD. They tested 116 children. And they compared them to a control group. So the control group is basically people that don't have ADHD. And magnesium deficiency was found in 95% of the kids with ADHD. So that's a very big number. So honestly, I'm telling you guys right now, magnesium glycinate is actually right away something we give to kids with ADHD. Whether they get tested or not is something that they benefit from. I think everybody actually benefits from magnesium glycinate, but yeah, absolutely, kids should be taking magnesium glycinate if they have ADHD. Here what they did is they actually gave magnesium supplementation to these kids that were low in magnesium. So 50 hyperactive children aged 7 to 12 years old who actually fit the criteria for ADHD according to the DSM. DSM is the book. It's basically the book of all the diagnoses that are psychologically related. They did this for 6 months and they gave 200 milligrams a day. And to be honest, 200 milligrams a day is not that much. Okay, so they really gave, basically, if you ask me, one of the minimal doses for ADHD. But they saw a huge significant difference. So the symptoms of hyperactivity really, really reduced. So that was only with a 200 milligram a day dose. So, and compared to control group, they saw a significant difference. Zinc. So parents always ask me, what about my kid's zinc? What about my kid's zinc? So some studies suggest that children with ADHD may have lower levels of zinc in their bodies. Some studies say kids with ADHD who take zinc with their traditional medication have an improvement in symptoms, so that zinc actually aids medication work to work better. Most of the research shows a drop of hyperactivity and impulsivity with zinc supplements. So zinc, what they did show with the research is the hyperactive state. That subtype, it really helps a lot with that. Zinc can be tested in the blood. It can also be tested doing something called a zinc tally test, where you swish a liquid in your mouth, and then if it takes a while for a bad taste to get in your mouth, then it can mean that you have a zinc deficiency. We test zinc and copper in all the kids that we see. We test it in the serum and the blood just to make sure, just because it is such a big component. Here's a little study. So 52 children, we gave them medication alone or medication with zinc. And there was a 37% reduction in amphetamine optimal dose, meaning that the kids that took zinc and their medication, and that was 30 milligrams of zinc, 15, they tried with a lower dose and that didn't work. But when they took a 30 milligram supplement of zinc along with their medication, they actually needed less medication to get even better results. So that was really interesting study. Choline research is brand new. It's just in the last maybe 5 years that this is becoming extremely popular. Choline is required to make the brain chemical acetylcholine, which regulates memory, focus, and muscle control. Research shows that during the 3rd trimester of pregnancy, choline is extremely important to support the development of baby's neurological development, so their brain, the baby's brain. Choline, what food is high in choline? So it's really hard to find choline in the diet, but it's actually very abundant in egg yolks, okay? Especially if the egg yolks are not cooked completely. Choline is very rich. You can take choline as a supplement as well, very easy, and it doesn't taste like anything. So usually we give this in a powder form, so we add it to the kids' protein smoothies. You can test genetics for choline, so some people don't process choline properly, and that you can test with genetics. However, you can't just, we don't have the means to test the person's concentration of choline, or not yet anyways. So choline is often a supplement we just add to the kids' protocol, and a lot of kids actually see a huge difference with this. This is a study. So they actually studied the gene variation to see, okay, the people that had the gene where choline wasn't, processed properly, were they more at risk of ADHD? And the answer was yes, as well as Alzheimer's disease. Okay, and now for others, let's talk about fat metabolism. Now, if you have seen me before for ADHD, there's a likelihood that I gave you something called L-carnitine. So L-carnitine is a supplement that there's so much research now on for ADHD. The way I explain it to my patients is 60% of our brains are made of fat, okay? And if someone can't burn fat properly, then they might have a hard time with concentration, with focus, can be mood, hyperactivity, okay? This is measured in organic acid testing. So we can actually measure the way a person processes fat through organic testing. Organic acid testing is when you give a urine sample. Then there's 2 components. When you get your results for the organic acid testing, there's 2 things. One is called adipate and the other called suberate, okay? It's very easy. You see it on the graph. And if these 2 things are high, it means the person has a really poor ability to metabolize fat. And like I said, 60% of your brain is made of fat. So if you can't metabolize fat properly, you'll have a lot of issues. When I see this as being positive on organic acid tests, I'm actually really happy because, to be honest, these individuals respond so well to acetyl-L-carnitine that they usually don't even need any other supplements. That's how amazing that this works. As far as the L-carnitine as a supplement goes, there are side effects. So people that do have epilepsy are not supposed to use acetyl-L-carnitine because it can make their epilepsy worse. Although some people with epilepsy, if they're medicated, then they actually want to be taking acetyl-L-carnitine. So that's great. So just, talk to your naturopathic doctor or your clinician and see if it's the right thing for you. But the best way to do it is get tested. Here's a little study. We tested the efficacy of carnitine in treatment of children with ADHD. 13 of the 24 boys that received carnitine actually had a huge improvement when it came to their behavior and their mood. Now, these people, they didn't test the 24 boys that they did the study on. So it would have been fun to see, okay, if they tested those 13 boys that really responded well to the supplement, was it because they had high adipate and subeate? Is it because that they had a hard time with fat metabolism? Omega-3 fatty acids. I think this is something that most parents will just give their kids. Usually by the time the kids see meat, they're already been on a fish oil, right? An omega-3 fatty acid. Very important for brain health. You know, I mentioned 60% of your brain is made of fat, so you want to support that fat. The good fats, which is called EPA and DHA. The best source is fish. Now, which fish should you be eating to get the good omega-3s, you know, through the diet? The acronym to always remember is SMASH. It's so easy. That's how I remember it myself. So salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, and herring. Actually, if you have 2 portions of these fish a week, it's said to be just as good as taking a regular fish oil supplement. Some people might want more though, but that's definitely a way to get it in your diet. We have a little study here again to support, you know, what we're doing. So we had 37 children divided into 2 groups, A and B, and this was a 16-week study. So in the first phase, for group A, we gave them omega-3 fatty acids. And then there's other types of good oils, you know, and one of them is called omega-6. So group A got the actual omega-3, then group B got sunflower oil, which is a different type of oil, but it's not a bad oil. And they noticed that the people that received the omega-3 fatty acids had a significant improvement. And so there is a lot of research for omega-3 in ADHD. Here again, so here it's 810 children, and they were giving zinc, magnesium, and EFA, which is a type of omega-3. And they did this for 3 months. Improvement in inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity noticed after 12 weeks. So this really helped with both hyperactivity and inattention. They also noticed, just as a side bonus, that their sleep and their mood had improved as well. So that's always exciting and great. There we go. We talked about sleep, right? So it's so common that kids with ADHD, adolescents, teens, or adults with ADHD have a hard time with sleep. A lot of them have a hard time falling asleep. Some people it's staying asleep, but not having the proper sleep will make the ADHD symptoms worse. People ask me, okay, melatonin. So magnesium will help with sleep, right? And we already know now, okay, magnesium is huge for ADHD. Is it safe to give melatonin to your child? It does depend on the child. I'm not going to lie. It's better if you see a clinician and see what's going on. But yes, usually it is very safe to give melatonin to a child, maybe, especially if the child needs it. Many children with ADHD have a hard time falling asleep. Melatonin is a safe supplement in low dose. So, you know, low dose is very important to remember. Some people give, 20 milligrams of melatonin to their kids, and that's way too high. You can start with 1 milligram, a very small dose, the smallest dose usually that you can find, and see how your child does with that. I usually would prefer that if you saw a clinician, just to see, okay, is there anything else? Do some testing to see what else could be contributing. But melatonin is definitely something that a lot of kids with ADHD actually really do well on, especially for sleep. And then when they're sleeping better, they're less hyperactive, their focus is better. Now, I could talk about all the treatments for ADHD because honestly, there's so many, and there's so many that's supported by research. Usually when we do the full testing with the people, we do blood work, we do urine tests, and from there I can make different recommendations. But I just listed there, this is all supplements that are nutraceuticals that have been shown to actually help improve the symptoms of ADHD. So what is the nutrient that has proven to affect mood and mental health the most? It's the one you're missing, right? So the point of this is that nobody's the same. It's all about individualized health. So to treat somebody, we need to really see, okay, what are they missing? What's making their symptoms worse? And that only happens with testing. This is the testing that we do at NutriChem, if you're unaware of it. And that was it. So I am going to take some questions now, okay? So let's see questions, and I'm going to try to go down the list. Can my child be iron deficient and cause mood swings along with his ADHD? Absolutely. So iron deficiency can cause anxiety, can cause depression, right? Can cause irritability, but it actually can cause attention issues. So if your child is deficient in iron, it can actually be one of the cause for, its attention issue. Our child is terrified of needles. Are there other ways to test them for deficiencies? So it's tough, honestly. So we do have great nurses and stuff like that that take the blood very, they're very gentle. And it's true that sometimes the child, uh, it's not pleasant for some children, right? We try to distract them as much as we possible, but no, for some things like hormones and stuff, especially, the thyroid, some you can maybe do it through urine, but it's not as easy as the blood. You can do some through saliva, some hormones, but if you want your iron store levels, then so ferritin, that has to be through the blood. Same with B12, it's through the blood. So unfortunately, I know it's tough. Um, you know, the child will forget about it, right? So it is maybe a stressful situation for the child. But we see kids with autism and stuff like that. One of our specialties is Down syndrome, so we do blood work with kids with Down syndrome, super young kids, and we always usually manage. Our phlebotomists or nurses will, even if the child is more comfortable at home, they'll actually travel to your home and do the blood draw there. They're really fantastic. We're really blessed with amazing staff. Somebody asked, do children benefit more from DHA or EPA? Thanks. So it's true, you can get fish oils that are higher in one than the next. The reason is that EFA and DHA can have both different positive aspects. So one is fantastic for inflammation. The other, so if somebody has more like arthritis and stuff, they might want to take more one type of fish oil, as opposed to if someone is more you want more concentration, so more brain related, you might want the next. Personally, for kids with ADHD, I like the mixture of both because you do want to reduce any inflammation they might have in the body, right? So I like to take just a regular fish oil. Well, I like to take a high potency fish oil, but that's high in EFA and DHA both. Are there multivitamins for kids that contain all supplements we discuss, or do you need to give them multiple supplement pills? So the multivitamins for kids, the generic, and that's for adults too. You're not addressing what your child actually needs because everybody needs a different dose of different types of vitamins and minerals. So actually, as a compounding pharmacy, what we usually do with our kids when we see them is we actually make them a customized multivitamin. And then this multivitamin, the kids have a choice. We can do it in capsule, we can do it in miniature capsules, or we can do it actually in the powder. And then we actually sweeten the powder with stevia, so there's no sugar in them, and then they can actually add flavor. It's all natural grape, fruit punch, oranges. They have different types of flavors, and most parents, that's what we do for the kids. And in that way, we will put everything they need in their supplement. So their vitamin D will be in there, the B vitamins will be there. If they have a methylation issue, we'll put the active forms of B vitamins. Melatonin, is it a hormone or a neurotransmitter? And how long can you take the supplement? So melatonin is actually a hormone. It's secreted by the pituitary gland, the pineal gland. So it's a gland in the brain, but it's actually classified as a hormone. How long can you take the supplement? When we balance out a person's biochemistry, they eventually do get off the melatonin. Okay. Melatonin with age decreases. So for adults, especially for us women, when we get through menopause and stuff like that, some of us actually become extremely deficient in melatonin. You can actually test melatonin. So melatonin you can test it through saliva. You just send in your saliva sample and you get it tested. So that tells you, your levels. If you're tested through saliva and you're very low, to be honest, you might actually need melatonin for a long term. As far as kids go, so usually magnesium helps a lot with sleep and stuff like that. And if they have a choline issue genetically, by giving them choline, that will help with their sleep. So once we address the biochemistry, then often they will be able to just get off the melatonin. Somebody asked if there's a multivitamin that I suggest. I suggest a personalized multivitamin, because all multivitamins, they're all very low in vitamins, right? It's really the minimal amount of vitamins you need in there. Like when you do vitamin testing, you're also testing for vitamin E, CoQ10. A lot of people are very low in CoQ10. I didn't talk about CoQ10, but even for ADHD, CoQ10 deficiency can really cause inattention disorder, so a focus disorder. So I think a personalized vitamin is actually the way to go. And I think it's the way to the future. It's individualized health. I think that's how it should be done. Vegan sources of choline. So there's sunflower seeds and soy are both vegan sources of choline if you don't eat eggs. They're not as high, but what you can actually do is you can get choline as a supplement, and so you can have it concentrated, because you'd have to eat so much soy, so many sunflower seeds if that was the case. But if you get choline as a supplement, they're usually from vegan sources. They're either from soy or from sunflower seeds. What's the cost to be tested and have your personal vitamins created? So as far as the personal vitamins created, that actually depends on what you need. So it varies per person. The average at NutriChem, we'd say they usually make it for 2 months at a time, and it's about $200. So it comes to about $100 a month for your supplements. It's usually more expensive if you buy everything separate, and at least this way you're not wasting money. I get people come in with a bunch of bottles of so much stuff, and often I'm like, you don't need to be taking this, right? According to their blood work, they're completely fine. The test itself, the initial test was $6.99. So $6.99, and that actually includes your 1 hour consult with a naturopathic doctor or a half-hour consult with a clinical pharmacist. So it's your choice. You can see naturopath or pharmacist. And then testing after that, it depends on what you need. So, you don't need to redo the entire test. It's called the BCB test. Some people will choose to do it once a year just to reassess, see if there's different stuff to change in their custom formula. But sometimes, let's say somebody is low in cortisol, right? So I'll usually get them to retest the cortisol 2 months later after we've done the original test. If you want to save money, we do offer people a portion of the test that we do is covered under OHIP if you get it from a medical doctor, so from a family doctor. So we do offer the list. Our patient coordinators at Bow Clinic can easily email you the list, so you can ask your doctor if they would be willing to write the requisition form for some of the tests on there, because you actually do end up saving, I think, between $150 to almost $200 off the test by doing so. What are the main deficiencies we should be testing children for? Honestly, I would start with the iron, B12, and I would do hormones for sure. Thyroid, I would do cortisol levels 100%, and vitamin D as well. If you're going to do one thing at a time, those are the first things I would do. Absolutely. If you have the money to do the genetic testing, 23andMe is so cheap. Yeah, it's online. It's fairly inexpensive. And it's not invasive for kids because you actually do it through saliva. So kids never have an issue doing that too. So it'd be good to see, if they have a choline issue or if they have a methylation issue as well. All right, everyone. So it looks like this is the end. That was the last question. We're going to be sending out the recording of this webinar tomorrow. So everybody's going to get a copy of it. And everybody's going to get, if you weren't able to download the information or the handout, they'll be emailing that as well. Okay, so thank you so much for listening. You can always email us at info@nutrichem.com if you have any questions, or you can always contact any of our clinics. So one is at Saint-Laurent across from the mall on Saint-Laurent Boulevard, and the other one's on Richmond Road at 1306 and 1303 Richmond Road. So have a great night, and thank you for listening.